Even though it was a life-changing moment for me, my father delivered the news casually, as though it was no big deal. I was 29 years old at the time. We were in the middle of a conversation about something entirely different, had nothing to do with money. By the way, he said, with no warning, there won't be any more money. I didn't know what he meant because there was no context, so I asked what he was talking about. He just said that he wouldn't be able to invest any more money into my small startup newspaper company that had been operating for about a year at the time. This floored me because he had promised a lot more money. I had had no reason to doubt him, so I wasn't prepared. My ex-wife and I had launched a weekly newspaper for Birmingham's affluent southern suburbs. My father had unexpectedly offered to finance the project, so we hadn't sought outside investment. It was hard to pin him down about exactly how much money he would invest, but he repeatedly told me not to worry. In a fatherly way, he would just say, all the money we needed would be there. So I spent the first year building a newspaper that local people loved to read. We were making a lot of progress with both readers and advertisers, but we were nowhere close to break even at that point. And now, out of the blue, he was telling me that there would be no more money. No warning, not a penny more, and no explanation. He didn't even want to talk about it. What I didn't know that day, and what I wouldn't learn until I pieced it together over the next few years, is that the money he had been giving to me for my company was all stolen. He had been embezzling millions of dollars for years. There was no more money because he had been caught. I'll never know the details about how his long-term theft ended. He wouldn't even acknowledge it for years. About 15 years later, he finally gave me a grudging admission of what I had already come to know. But in those brief seconds when he made that little bit of an admission, he also gave an excuse to try to justify it, as though he was trying to make himself seem as though, well, it's understandable. Anybody would have done it. I don't know the exact amount of money he stole, but I do know that it was many millions of dollars, which was quite a lot of money for us. My father worked as an administrative assistant to a man who owned and operated several coal companies. This man was a good businessman who made a lot of money and then finally sold his operation to a large mining company from the West. He retired as a very wealthy man, and he had tremendous assets to manage. My father controlled all of that money. The wealthy man completely trusted him. The theft started when my grandparents were in a nursing home near the end of their lives. My father didn't have enough money to pay their bills, so we started embezzling to pay nursing home bills. That was the excuse he gave me the one time that he admitted anything. Once he started stealing, it was apparently easy to get away with it, and he never stopped. Even after his parents were dead, he stole over and over and over again. He stole the money to buy a large chunk of land, maybe a couple of 100 acres, maybe 160, I don't remember exactly. And he had to build a road out to the home site. He had to build a bridge over a creek and run utilities for miles. The house was very nice, out in the middle of nowhere. It was his dream home. My guess is that the house would easily cost more than $1 million to build today, even without the site preparation and the land or anything like that, partly because of the expensive changes he made along the way. But I might be wrong about the cost of the house, but that's not really the point anyway. He bought fancy things for his second wife, who he had married years after he and my mother divorced. First, it was a Cadillac for her, and later a Mercedes. There was a mink coat and various jewelry. He was spending money that was insane for someone who made what he presumably made. I once asked him how he had been able to do so well since his job paid something relatively modest. I remember being surprised when I saw the figures when I'd been applying for financial aid in college, and I remember being surprised at how little money he was showing. All he could tell me was really good investments. I asked him how I could do the same thing because I wanted to know what his secrets were, but he couldn't tell me. I was genuinely interested in his secrets to wealth. What I didn't know is that he had no secrets to making money, only how to embezzle it. And he wasn't going to tell me that. When it came time for me to start my newspaper, after I'd been working as an editor for other companies for years, he was eager to hand me the money. He never advanced me enough to keep us from feeling as though we were broke every week or two. But after I would make another trip to his office and grovel, he would advance me what I had to have and make me feel terrible for asking what he had promised, what he had volunteered to give me. It was a very dysfunctional business arrangement. When he suddenly quit providing more money, I scrambled for new investors while still struggling to get the newspaper out each week. The worst part is that I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. Potential investors wanted to know how we could have ended up with such a terrible need for cash. Why hadn't we managed our cash flow and planned for this? I mean, they weren't nasty about it, but you could tell what they wanted to know. I couldn't answer that question. I still didn't even have all the facts. I couldn't even tell my own employees what was going on, including the men I had hired to manage our finances. Things moved rapidly as we scrambled to move assets around, commingling personal and company funds at random just to stay afloat. Within a month or so, I had to shut the newspaper down. We were out of cash. Announcing to my remaining employees that they were out of jobs was one of the most gut-wrenching things I've ever had to do. I was humiliated, and I knew that I had let them down. I felt like a complete failure. I don't know whether something in the wealthy man's accounting system finally flagged the missing money, or if guilt finally led my father to confess. It's hard to see him voluntarily admitting to anything, but I'll never know. This wealthy man who had trusted my father for years and treated him like a member of his family took mercy on him. They came to an agreement through their lawyers that the wealthy man would take everything my father owned. Every bit of money, every property, every stock and bond, everything. But he wouldn't prosecute. My father wouldn't go to prison. My father's second wife quickly divorced him. I never spoke to her again, so I don't know her perspective. My father wouldn't talk to any of us about what had happened. We just knew he was suddenly without a home and without any money. He moved west for a couple of years. He didn't talk to any of us for those years. He lived in California and Nevada for a while, but it's unclear to me what he did. And frankly, even if he told me, I wouldn't believe him. I've learned not to believe what he says. Back in the period when it was first becoming obvious that something was going on with him, when he had already left his longtime job but still had his home and assets, my ex-wife and my sisters and I arranged for him to come to my condo in Birmingham so we could confront him. We were hearing vague rumors from friends back in the small town where we went to high school, where all of this took place, that there was, quote, something going on with your father. Nobody would tell us anything more than that. We just had friends asking us what was going on, but wanting to change the subject when we tried to get them to tell us more about what they might have heard. When we got my father alone at my condo, I outlined that we were hearing rumors that there was something going on with him. I told him that we thought we deserved to know what was happening, since there was talk on the street among our old friends about some scandal. I will never forget him looking right at me, very, very calmly. "There's nothing going on," he said with total sincerity. "I have no idea what anyone could be talking about." My father humiliated us, but he never would confess the complete truth. As we started learning bits and pieces of what had happened, we were embarrassed that our old friends from high school knew about this terrible thing, which at the time seemed to reflect on us. That's the way I felt anyway. We were the last to know about the scandal. He didn't care enough about us to warn us about what was coming, or even to be honest when we begged him to tell us the truth. My father was the one who taught us to be moral and decent people. He insisted on complete honesty and complete fairness in everything, as far as we could tell. We were always in church when I was a child, and he was still doing the same after we had moved away. He had always projected the air of being Mr. Morality, and I had never seen a moment of anything that seemed to be hypocrisy from him. This was the last thing that I expected of him. For a long time, I felt like a failure for the shutdown of my newspaper. It was my first big business venture, and I fell on my face. I couldn't explain the reasons to anyone. I didn't even know all the details. From the vantage point of all these years later, I realized it wasn't so simple as me being a failure. Yes, I failed. Yes, I trusted the wrong person. Yes, I was unprepared to handle the fallout, and I was too inexperienced to know how to fix things quickly enough. But the truth is that my father failed me. He broke the trust of those who believed he was trustworthy. He failed the wealthy man from whom he stole, and he failed me because he couldn't keep his promises. Most of all, he failed all of us who believed in him to any degree. Despite all of the things I was starting to realize about him at the time, that our family was completely dysfunctional, none of us believed he was a thief. When I was a little boy, I believed he must be great. Don't all children start out with some such belief in their parents? Despite all the things he had done to me and all the ways I was starting to realize that my childhood had been abusive, I clung to that childlike belief in his greatness, at least in some vague way. I was still years away from learning what he really was. I had still never heard of narcissism. He wasn't just an embezzler, though. He suffered from narcissistic personality disorder, and he somehow couldn't care about how his terrible decisions affected other people, even though he had plenty of chances to confess to his children and to others about what he had really done and apologize for how it had affected us. He continued to see himself as a victim until the day that he died. By stealing many millions of dollars and blowing up my little media company, he destroyed the last of my faith and trust in him. He wasn't the man I had wanted him to be, the man he had trained me to believe in, the man who I needed him to be. I never recovered my faith in him. In a very real way, that was the last betrayal of my dysfunctional childhood.